Welcome one and all to the show. This is the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael.
And I'm James.
Today we are talking about episodes 9 and 10, the second two-parter of the first season of NuWho, which is The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. It's written by Steven Moffat. You might be hearing his name again later on.
Maybe not, though.
Perhaps not. It might be a different Steven Moffat. Who's to say? I actually did the track, so it could be. And it first aired May 2005.
Almost 20 years ago. That's a whole fine thought.
I know, when you put it in that perspective. And this is an important two-parter for a bunch of reasons. But before we hit on any spicy material, James, if you were to go through the plot.
Well, of course, being one of the more famous ones of the fourth season, perhaps even the most famous story of the fourth season. You'll probably recognize it if you haven't seen it, but the plot is as follows. The Ninth Doctor and Rose arrive in 1941 during the London Blitz, where they find that the city has been terrorized by a strange child in a gas mask, and Rose meets a mysterious friend.
And it's in that mysterious friend in which the story gained its fame. Actually, it's not remotely true at all, because just the children in gas masks and such, that's probably fame enough. The mysterious friend James mentioned is naturally Captain Jack Harkness, who is played by John Barrowman.
Yeah, John Barrowman has been an amazing actor in his time in Doctor Who. Of course, he later goes on, spoiler alert, to star in the Torchwood series, or one of the main stars anyway. And for a while did Torchwood monthly audios, of course, for big fairness. And I don't know, I'm assuming BBC had a Torchwood thing.
I would think
range.
So. But who's to say if he was actually involved, or if this one just like being rad or something? I don't know.
That's true. He could have been involved, though. But yeah, John Barrowman had a very long run. He even showed up recently, which is strange to think about, in, 2 episodes of Chibnall's era?
Yeah, not that he did that much in either one, but he did pop up. Actually, technically 3.
Was it 3?
He popped up just to talk to Dan for like 5 seconds in one. Then he popped up in the prison episode. I'm not sure. Point is,
I think it was just 2. Which shows, by the way, Captain Jack should not be unmemorable. So the fact that we're not even... I'm pretty sure it's 2. But the fact that we're even having the discussion shows they didn't quite use Jack in the way that they sort of. But, of course, those in the know are aware that John Barrowman... The thing about John Barrowman is he has a very fratboy sense of humor. He was known for flashing himself on set because he thinks it's funny. Or at the time, I'm not going to say he does now. He thought it was fun. He just had that mindset. And he had been reprimanded a few times during the time he was on set. But then when the whole No Clock stuff came out, and No Clock just being a sexual harasser, he tried to point the fingers, oh, but look at John Barrowman. And so Barrowman kind of got softed in all of that, and he had to apologize again. And apparently the apology the second time around wasn't all that good, or all that gracious. So he's just not doing Doctor Who things right now, which I find disappointing. I think, as much as like Mickey's character, No Clock really should not be doing Doctor Who things, so really maybe acting in general. But when it comes to John Barrowman, yes, I don't like his sense of humor. Yes, it's misconduct and it's perhaps harassment, depending on how you want to phrase it, even though I'm not sure I'll go that far. But I say, honestly, let Barrowman come back, because especially compared to what No Clock did, he's never done anything horrible. Yeah, he's an idiot, but he's not a sexual harasser.
I guess where I come from is what the intent is. Like, Barrowman might not be showing the best judgment, but he's just, I guess, on set having fun in the ways that he knows how to have fun. Admittedly, I haven't read that deep into it, so I don't want to speak too much on it, but I don't think his intent was that of a negative intent, whereas from my understanding, No Clock literally harassed women, and that is a problem. Whereas I just don't get that same sense of malevolence from Barrowman whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I think it's safe to say Barrowman's just an idiot, or has been an idiot in the past. And he's a bit exuberant in the way he likes to have fun and play around. But I don't think he's a sexual predator. Certainly nothing like what No Clock has been, I suppose you have to say, allowed to have done. But those are my thoughts on John Barrowman. My experience with him as, I've never met him, of course. I've not been to any fan conventions or the like. I've just seen him on TV. And my opinion of him is basically he likes to have fun. He's an idiot. He's probably grown as a person. And I would personally like to have him back in Doctor Who doing things again. But my wants are not going to be considered in this matter.
But it's no doubt important that his character first appears here, a character who goes on to do things I don't even entirely know, because just as a reminder, while I've seen the first season of Torchwood on an episode of season 2, I've not seen anything more than that. So I don't know like the depth of his character or what goes on in his life. I have absolutely no idea. So even me not knowing other things that he's done or necessarily his importance to the overall Doctor Who universe, his character is certainly, I mean, from his very first scene, it's certainly a very charismatic character, very enjoyable character. It's not like Eccleston and Billie Piper don't have a good chemistry already, but he just adds something else to it. I think it's just a lot of fun, and this story, I think, shows what the potential he has in this universe.
Yeah, no, I think he's an amazing character introduction. Plus, they didn't need to introduce somebody like him. This easily could have just been Rose and the Doctor dealing with this alien infection from this ship that they were chasing through the time void. But no, they also happened to add one of the most memorable non-companion. Well, I suppose he's technically a companion in a way, but we only ever see him in 3 stories as a companion. So he never actually feels like it. Plus, because of the character he is, he always seems much more equal to the Doctor than actually subservient. Sounds kind of wrong, but he doesn't fit the normal companion mode, especially in the Reviver series.
The Doctor does trash him down pretty harshly at the end of, I guess that's the beginning of the second episode, so it's hard.
I mean, yes, but once they make up and once the Doctor's happy about the resolution of this story, which he has got reason to be happy for, then he gets a bit more calm about him, even though I'm thinking he still is going to take a bit of time to get used to him, because he still was a little house towards him for a little bit at the very end. But either way, that's understandable considering what happened in the story and what Captain Jack had wrought upon London during this time of war.
And we do get a few inklings into Captain Jack's past. Apparently he is a former time agent. There's something called the Time Agency, which we've not heard of before. At least to my knowledge, we've not heard of before. Who's to say it did pop up in some book? But I've not heard of before. I have no idea what the relation is to, I don't know, the Shadow Proclamation. Is there any relation between the two? I have no idea. I have no idea if the Time Agency is some type of like intergalactic approved organization or something. I just don't know what they are or what the goal is. But Jack is a former time agent. Now he's a con man. I guess that's how he rolls. And apparently the Time Agency stole 2 years of Jack's memories. Jack has no idea what he was up to for those 2 years. So Time Agency sort of sounds like the CIA.
Yeah, if the CIA could do that, they would do that.
As you can imagine, as anyone would be, Jack's not very happy that 2 years of his memories are missing, which is, I imagine, why he left the agency and what brings him to where he is now. And related, he's apparently from the 51st century, and that was sort of interesting how we found that out. It shows some intelligence and forethought by the Doctor, because they being the Doctor, Rose, and Jack need to get through a door, and the Doctor wants Jack to use whatever gun and or weapon and or way he has to open it. And Rose is like, can't you open it, Doctor? And he's like, sure. But he wants to see what type of thing he has, so you can sort of place where he's from, or at least where the weapon's from, to give him a better idea of who he's working with. Because as you can imagine, the Doctor's somewhat mistrustful of anyone, aside from himself, who's sort of out of time. So when they ran into Jack in 1941 London, and this guy's from like, obviously from the future, he has alien technology, including on the side note, an invisible spaceship sort of parked outside Big Ben. The Doctor's suspicious. So he sort of wants to see if he can figure out where he's from his weapon. He can tell he's from the 51st century. And that actually leads to another funny thing about the weapon that I will touch on a bit later.
Yeah, and one last thing about Jack himself. I thought this was true, but I just double-checked. A time agent is actually first referenced in the times of Wing Chai-ing. Ironically enough, also from the 51st century. So that was actually the first... I had the idea that it was, but I wanted to double-check to make sure.
Yeah, tons of Wing Chai-ing. That's a story I really enjoyed, but it's also a story I've only seen once, so I think I can be forgiven for missing it.
Yeah, of course, Tines of Wing Chai-ing not only had Tom Baker in that amazing get-up he wore, but also introduced the glories of Jago and Lightfoot, which have now had, 12 big finish seasons?
Indeed. And I just went to, this is a website that has like the transcript of every Doctor Who televised story. It's very useful. And I just went to Tons of Wing Chai-ing. And it's apparently this character named Chang talking to Wang. Great names. And this one guy saying, oh, he's a Dr. Tao Man. He asks many questions. And then Wang replies, well, a time agent would not ask questions. A time agent would know. So that's the extent to the reference in that story. But it does show, I guess, the time agency has some type of competency behind them. So something.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And I know that Rossi Davis obviously watched the classic series. So I wonder if he remembered or wanted to expand on the time agency or versus a happy coincidence. But it does seem like there's a bit more than a coincidence considering it is after the 51st century. But stranger things have happened.
And John Barrowman is easily the most important actor in this character, aside from, of course, Eccleston and Billie Piper. But we also have a few other people I wanted to mention. There's a younger actress named Florence Hoeth who plays Nancy. And we mentioned in the plot how there's like a strange child in a gas mask. And it seems like this child who goes around asking, are you my mommy? Or sometimes just calls out, mommy. Which apparently some people find, hey, I have to take care of that kid, as opposed to, hey, that's fucking creepy, bro. I'm out of this.
Yeah, no, it's in the most creepy voice you could imagine.
Yeah, apparently this child has some type of strange fascination or attraction to Nancy. And Nancy sort of, I would want to say the leader. She's an older teenager, tries to take care of a bunch of homeless kids in this like war-torn London. She gets some decent screen time, and I think James mentioned that she's retired from acting now, but I thought she did pretty good in this role.
No, I thought she was really good in this role as well. It's quite sad that she retired from acting, but I understand. Some people just don't want acting to be their life, and I can't blame them for that. People do what they do.
Yeah, she worked quite well with some emotional material she was given, and I was impressed. And this other actor, he doesn't play as big a role, but it's a Richard Wilson who played Dr. Constantine, who's a doctor. Seems like he's the only doctor of this nearby hospital who's trying to care for, well, a bunch of people. We mentioned this one kid has a gas mask on him and just sort of haunts people. But apparently when he touches people, they sort of transform, not into him, they don't become copies of him, but they also get like a sort of a gas mask sort of grows from their face, and they become much like him. They lose memories of who they are. I guess we're not technically aware of their consciousness, but they pretty much seem like zombies in many aspects. And there's a bunch of these. I mean, this has been going on for a month. So there's like probably 100 or so, a bit more infected patients in this hospital are with gas masks and such. And this one doctor trying to take care of them. So Richard Wilson only gets maybe a handful of scenes in the story, but I think he does a pretty good job during his time on screen.
Yeah, and this is what I would call the first horror episode of the Revival series. And there was patterns of these throughout most seasons of the Revival. And I think this is an amazingly effective one. There are just some great horror scenes throughout this story. One of them being when Dr. Constantine is showing the doctor these patients. Because the doctor's going from patient to patient saying basically that this is impossible, what he's seeing. Which basically comes down to physical injuries as plague, which obviously is alarming, and the doctor's not seen this before. But it's just a really good scene, and there's so many horse patterns throughout this episode. It was very well done. It might actually be one of the best horror ones, or among the best horror ones, but that would, I suppose, take more rewatching to finally consider that list. But it'd certainly be up there.
Yeah, so when our Brothers Mahoney discuss Doctor Who Halloween episodes to watch, be ready.
And one of them is not going to be the Halloween Apocalypse.
That's true, but one of them might be Blink. Be there.
I've always thought that Blink is slightly overrated, but to be fair, I've seen it like 7 or 8 times. So maybe it's just grown wary on me.
I mean, it may be overrated. I still think it would make that list, though.
I mean, yes, that and Midnight.
Yeah, this story has a nicely horror vibe, mixed in with some nice mystery too. Because we have no idea what's the story behind this kid in the gas mask and what's the relationship with Nancy. And I mean, I guess the time agent thing, Jack being there, is sort of explained, but you suspect there's more to it. And there's just a bunch of questions here. And to be fair, that's not uncommon in Doctor Who. The difference is, given this is a two-parter, the story has a bit more time to set up these questions. It gives you a bit more time to breathe and feel like more of a natural mystery, as opposed to trying to shove it out in 43 minutes. So I think that actually helped. Like, if they had tried to make this a single episode story, I don't think it would have worked. I'd rather say an hour, because I'm sure they would have found a way, but it would have been a pale imitation of what this turned out to be.
Yeah, no, I think the two-partness of this is really what makes it as good as it is. I sadly think how this would be done if it was just one part. I don't think they'd have room for any of the Captain Jack stuff. Because how did they fit another person into the story?
Yeah, I think they would have had to get rid of him just because he added this amount of screen time. But one thing the story tries to do is sort of counterpose the Doctor to Captain Jack. I mean, both of them are, because technically speaking, I don't know if it's fair to say the Doctor's a futuristic man, because I have no idea what quote-unquote time Gallifrey actually was at. But as far as Rose is concerned, both the Doctor and Captain Jack are men of the future, and she always wants to find the men from the future, especially the attractive men from the future, for her own needs. And this is an early scene, which the Doctor and Rose, once they get here, now they don't know where they know they're in London, but they don't know what time it is. They have no idea it's 1941 because they're just in some dark alleyway. And I imagine the dark alleyway in 1941 looks the same as the dark alleyway in 2015. And they're looking for some type of capsule they were chasing in the time stream. And Rose says, hey, can't you just scan for alien tech? And the Doctor doesn't much care for the idea. He actually wants to just go and ask people. He wants to go talk to people and say, hey, have you seen something fall from the sky in the last month or so? Which so funny. Just wants to go ask people that. But I think it shows what we mentioned a little bit about in Father's Day. The Doctor, despite not being able to live this type of quote-unquote normal human life, he does have an appreciation for them. And it seems like he legitimately likes talking to people or communicating with people. He just likes the social aspect of it. And that's on a side note why the Doctor and Rose get separated so early on. Rose goes on to meet Captain Jack, whereas the Doctor goes on his own adventure. It's actually a nice way to split the two apart.
Yeah, and of course, once Rose meets with Captain Jack and she needs to find the Doctor, Captain Jack, to find the Doctor, just scans for alien tech.
Yeah, you can tell that it enhances Rose's interests, shall we say. To be fair, John Barrowman, I would say, is a traditionally very attractive individual. I think Rose is technically with Mickey, but let's be fair, who's really with Mickey if you're in 1941 London? So,
I mean, yeah, also, she might be quote-unquote with Mickey, but there's also Adam.
Yeah, that's true too. So, Rose may not be the most loyal of individuals, but
I don't know, maybe they had an open relationship.
Yeah, it's fair, we don't know. So, I'd rather go judge Rose too harshly.
But I know a lot of people do.
I imagine so. But yeah, Rose is quite interested in, it's not particularly hidden, because it's not like Captain Jack's not interested either. His character is one of a very floaty personality. That's just how he is.
And also very open, because we see, I think in his very first scene, he's also pretty openly interested in another man. So, as the Doctor later says, it's the 51st century.
Yeah, and that's another thing I appreciate, because I have to imagine it was a lot more safe, might be the right word, but I mean, obviously keep in mind that at least gay marriage in the US wasn't, well, I think the first state legalized in 2002?
Yeah, I think that was
maybe.
Massachusetts.
Yeah, Massachusetts, and naturally I think it was in 2013 it became legal countrywide.
Correct.
But homosexuality is depicted a lot more openly in British culture than I think it usually was in the US because of the whole violence and sexuality thing that we have going on here. But I do appreciate how this is 2005 in a major TV show and Captain Jack is just hitting on me. And not only that, but the guy, the individual who was hitting on seemed completely okay with it. It's like, there's a time and a place, Jack. I do sort of like seeing that. And I think it's fun that they brought a character in here to sort of, I guess, represent bisexuality, which I'm not going to say we haven't seen in Doctor Who before, because I don't know anything about like the wider history of Doctor Who. Like, I'd actually sort of be surprised if it did come up in the book. But it's nice to see in the form of Captain Jack here.
Yeah, and the last interesting thing about, well, certainly not the last interesting thing about Captain Jack, but there's also his timeline to consider. Now, if you've watched Torchwood as a whole, you know there's a lot to this. But just for now, and this is something maybe to keep in the back of your mind as we continue on, and we will be talking about Torchwood Season 1 after we discuss Season 2 of the revival for Doctor Who. So Captain Jack is a time agent, well, an ex-time agent from around the 51st century. Now, he's a con man. He's done cons like the one he was going to play on the Doctor before. In other places before. Now, we're not sure exactly where he did that. I mean, he is a time agent. Maybe he's traveled to other times before. Maybe he's very well traveled in that. But we see the Doctor and Rose pick him up here in 1941 in the UK. And it's just an interesting thing to remember that this is his starting point where we see his character. And to just try to follow along his character from now until the last time we see him. Because it's fascinating what his timeline is like. And those are little hints to Michael, who again hasn't seen all of Torchwood.
He likes lying out them hints for me, and never letting me actually eat the hints. It's disappointing.
I am a disappointing follower.
That's how I often see you. So, while Rose is off engaging with Jack in what can only be described as carnal conversation. I imagine can be described a great many ways. But while Rose is after doing that, the Doctor sort of runs into, as we mentioned earlier, a group of homeless children. They have a pretty good thing going for, well, they're the homeless, so I don't say they have a good thing going for them. I sound like Fox News now. They have an okay deal going for them. So when the air sirens go off, and if you don't know much about London's history or the history of the UK, German bombers would sort of fly over London, and I have to imagine other cities, and just decimate the city. So they would have air sirens going off and people watching to see if any German fighters come by. So they would let the air sirens go off and people would get to the shelters. And I have to imagine, I mean, the fact that they survived through that is impressive. But so when families sort of go hide in the shelters, this group of children sort of go into a house, and while the families are in the shelters, they take what they can, they eat what they can, just so they can survive. You do what you can to survive. And the Doctor, during one of the impromptu dinners, found a pretty nice house, had a decent amount of food. Like, they had a decent amount of food in the cabinets, but they also had, like, a nice dinner laid out, including, I think it was a giant turkey. While they're having one of the impromptu dinners, the Doctor pops in and just talks with them, and much like Ollie, talks to them, and he's able to form a decent connection with them, which I think is sort of fun.
Yeah, no, this Doctor, he might be a bit rough when it comes to adults. We've seen that in the past. He's also not too bad depending on the adult. As you said on Father's Day, he can, when he needs to be calming, he can be extremely calming to people who are in distress. But he also sometimes just doesn't give a damn. But with children, this Doctor is just really great. He has no problem whatsoever that these kids are breaking into houses to, quote-unquote, steal food, what I call surviving. And he's just having a joyful conversation with them while having some food with them. And it's just a really nice scene to see. And it leads to a very Russell T Davies line. We've discussed in the past, Russell T Davies has a bit of leftist in him. And I don't know how much a bit is, but he had the Doctor actually say, in reaction to watching what these kids do, sneak into the houses to survive, that he's not sure if it's Marxism in action or a West End musical. But either way, the Doctor's based for having even had that line. Now, of course, the Doctor in the past, the third Doctor, I believe, considered Mao a good friend of his, so maybe the Doctor's always been based. And of course, they paraphrased Marx at the end of the Sandmakers, so maybe the Doctor's always been based. Maybe not in a violent revolutionary way, but in an ideological way. In any case, I think it was a hilarious line you throw in. And anybody who's watched Doctor Who still know the Doctor's not a moderate liberal, just going around accepting things as they are.
Unless the only thing they've watched in Doctor Who was Whittaker's Time.
Yes.
In which case they might be excused for thinking that.
Yes, if that is your only Doctor Who experience, you are completely excused for not realizing that is not how the Doctor is usually portrayed. Because I think Chibnall's one of the most liberal showrunners in Doctor Who history, honestly. At least in modern age, but I guess there have only been 3. But either way, I thought there was a rather hilarious line. And the Doctor's just cheerful acceptance of what the children are doing to survive. It's just great to see.
And linking back briefly to sort of like the horror themes of the episode, naturally this story features, well, not only like really what seems like one of the few zombie stories of Doctor Who, but also has the horrors of war. Because when the Doctor goes to see Dr. Constantine in the hospital, the Doctor, and by the Doctor in this case I mean Dr. Constantine, so I should be clear. But Constantine believes, because there's so many people infected in this hospital, he thinks that the hospital is actually going to be bombed by the British, so his own government, and the bombing is going to be blamed on the Germans just to sort of get rid of the problem. I mean, obviously, to some extent, it's not like this thing's a private affair. People have to know a little bit that something strange is going on, some strange infections going on. Certainly, this hospital is like a stone's throw away from this military base. So yeah, he believes that the hospital is likely to be banned by its own government. Nothing necessarily comes of that plot point or plot idea, but just to add to like the horrors of war, because that type of thing certainly happened before. So the fact that they bring it up as a possibility here just shows, I guess, the desperation of the situation.
Yeah, and I completely would believe of the British government. It'd even be more believable under the CIA. You know, I completely believe in a case like this, the British government would probably do that.
But that also leads to, I guess that doesn't lead to, but that takes place in the hospital where we see the cliffhanger of the first episode. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily the most famous cliffhanger of NuWho, but I think it has to be among one of the most memorable, as the Doctor and company are sort of backed up against the wall, while like this whole group of infected gas mask people are just coming up to them saying, "Mommy, mommy," and it's a very well filmed cliffhanger. And I mean, it's one of those cliffhangers that, I mean, some cliffhangers are a bit weak, and you could argue, I guess, that the resolution to this cliffhanger in the Dr. Dantes is a bit weak, but I was okay with it. I think it's a really strong cliffhanger, and definitely something that would bring people back in the following week.
Honestly, I quite like the resolution in the Dr. Dances, just because it fit thematically with the Doctor's understanding, and he had to come to very quick understanding of what was going on with this child. And so I thought there was a good way to show the Doctor's been thinking through some ways to deal with the situation, and he happened to come upon one way that worked pretty well. And then also ended up having unintended facts, but he didn't need to worry about that at that time. And it's during this sequence, after the Doctor, Rose, and Captain Jack are able to escape from the gas mask victims / zombies, where the Doctor and Jack discuss the weapon factories of Villengard, which is also from the 51st century. That is where Jack was able to get his gun. What does he call it? Does he have a name for it?
Honestly, I think it was okay calling it this queerness gun.
Yeah, I think he was fine with this queerness gun. Honestly, it was a pretty cool device. But Jack is, all proud about it and says, "Oh yeah, I got it from the weapon factories of Villengard." And the Doctor says, "Oh yeah, I've been there once." And Jack's like, "Oh really? It's destroyed now. Some core reactor blew up." And the Doctor replies, "It's in the most putting on sunglasses mood ever. Like I said, once." So the Doctor is just going around blowing up weapons factories. Makes me wonder that was the 7th Doctor, honestly. It kind of fits in with his motif. But I guess we won't ever know exactly.
Unless we do.
Well, okay, maybe we do. But I'm not aware if we know which version of the Doctor blew up a weapons factory. But I like the idea that it wasn't even some alien threat. He just did it himself. He just shot the weapons factory out himself and blew it up.
Yeah,
That's what I like to think.
Yeah, it would be really disappointing to learn that, oh hey, it was a mission from the Gallifreyans. That would be disappointing.
Hey, maybe this is harkening back to season 6B.
Hey, maybe during his charging times, but indeed.
Before the Scarecrows.
I think it just adds to the sort of playful banter between the 9th Doctor and Captain Jack. I just think it works well together. And Jack, he makes some mistakes in this episode, I guess in and previous to the events of this episode, that in a way he sort of causes this whole virus to happen. It's not really entirely his fault, but he is largely to blame, which is why I mentioned earlier that the Doctor sort of goes off on him. Because he does come across at times as a bit self-centered and selfish, but then you learn a bit more about him. And he seems like a generally decent guy. He does quite a brave act toward the end of the episode. He's sort of anticipating dying because of his actions. And naturally, he gets saved by the Doctor and Rose, that was a really nice scene too. But he does mention, and I thought this was a funny quote, and a good encapsulation of the Jack's type of character. But it's a quote, he's talking to like the AI, I guess, on his ship. But it's like, "Last time I was sentenced to death, I ordered 4 hyper vodkas for my breakfast. All a bit of a blow after that. Woke up in bed with both of my executioners. Lovely couple. They stayed in touch. Can't say that about most executioners."
He had a great delivery. He thought he was about to die. And it was just such a good delivery. It was so wistful, but absolutely hilarious at the same time.
I can't say that about most executioners. That's a nice scene. And I think it plays in well, because that's a really nice scene. The Doctor and Rose come to save him. Everyone dances, and hey, I can dance, Rose. with a goofy fucking dance the Doctor's doing. But it's also an exceptionally nice scene, and this is another scene that's one of those memorable scenes of the episode, where once everyone lives. It's a touching scene where at the end of the story where the Doctor is able to sort of reverse this virus going on, well, with the help of some nanobots. And, well, as it says on the tin, seems like everyone lives, really. And it was just a nice scene to see, and you have to imagine the Doctor feels exceptionally good about that, given the tragedies he's had to deal with in, like, the last 100 years he's been around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it feels amazing for him to have a adventure, have an experience like this. That seems so hopeless for a bit, and yet it turns around and no one ends up dying. In fact, not that he knows, but somebody even gets their leg back, as this woman says to her Doctor, "When I came to the hospital, I had 1 leg."
Hey, are you sure you didn't miscount? Not necessarily the best reply, but I'm not sure how else you can deal with it.
the joy on Eccleston's face when he realized that it was going to be okay, and just what he was saying before, oh, please let this work, when he realized what was about to happen. It was just really helpful to see what was going on emotionally for the Doctor there. And I think he really needed something like this after the horrors at the time were.
And actually, one other really nice sequence I read that you mentioned, and the Doctor's not even involved in this one, but it's when Rose is talking to Nancy. And Nancy, she's a older teenager in 1941, seeing London being completely decimated. And she's like, what type of future do you even have? And Rose gives like a really nice, I don't want to say speech, but just say, hey, I was born in London, 40 years from now? I forget the exact thing, but saying, hey, I was born in London too. You guys get through this and you guys win. And it's just a really nice, it's a really nice scene. And I think it shows also some compassion Rose has, which you saw a little bit also back in The Unquiet Dad, when she was talking with what's her name, Gwyneth.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of that. I did like Nancy's reply, but you're not German. And to be fair, Rose does have blonde hair, so maybe she jumped the gun a little on that assumption, but either way, I do think it was a very nice scene for Rose. Now, before we go to our thoughts on the two powers as a whole, I want to quickly do our section on the timeline. As listeners know, we enjoy the TARDIS Wiki, and the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each Doctor, including the extensive extended media ranging from the comic books, comic strips, Big Finish and BBC audio, the multiple book ranges, and everything in between. Doctor Who canon is a jumbled mess and has been for as long as it's existed. And it's just fun, personally, for me to see where the stories we're discussing fit into the narrative, the universe as a whole, because continuity and the timeline has always been very interesting to me in just really anything, but in Doctor Who particularly when you're dealing with time travel. And so this one is, as usual, slightly interesting. Right before this, there was a comic book story entitled Rhyme or Reason, which is from just a one-shot graphic novel, Once Upon a Time Lord, which actually came out, I think it was either September or November 2023. See, this is just one of those fun things where previously to that coming out, we of course had no idea that there was something that happened in between this and the last thing, which I believe was an audio. But this comes out just 4 months ago, and now we have more Ninth Doctor. I believe it was a 10th Doctor story, but he flashes back to a 9th Doctor adventure for a little bit. So that's kind of cool. And afterwards, there is a novel from the BBC New Adventures range. And the BBC New Adventures range was created with the revival of Doctor Who. Of course, the first novel was tying the 9th Doctor and Rose together, which replaced both the 8th Doctor Adventures and what was the BBC version of Past Adventures?
The BBC was Past Adventures. For watching, it was the Missing Adventures.
Yeah, I think one day I'll get that right, but that's not today. So this came along, the new series, and it replaced both of those, which is kind of sad in the case of the Past Doctor Adventures. So right after this story is the novel The Deviant Strain, written by Justin Richards, which is funny because he did Whispers of Terror, he's done some books we haven't read yet. Did he also do The Land of the Dead, Justin Richards, or was that another writer?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe, but I wanted to err on the side of caution. It looks like that was a Stephen Cole.
Okay, well, finally enough, Stephen Cole is also a writer for some Doctor Who books. It's always nice to see how these names come up again and again and again, as Bride should say. But this was the 4th book in the New Adventure series from September 2005, and I think it'd be really fun to read a Doctor Who book that has both Rose and the 9th Doctor. As we said before, as a companion, Captain Jack only appears for 3 stories, and that's just not enough. So it's great that there's at least one book, and I would hope maybe some audios, although I doubt he came back to do audio stories, at least not related to Torchwood. I'm sure actually there's probably some good comic stories that take place in this time. I think that's the most likely for this. It's just nice to see that there's at least one book where we get to enjoy these 3 working together. I think it will be a very interesting book to read. Plus, it takes place in the Soviet Union. So that's another plus, hopefully. I didn't read much about it, but it sounds quite intriguing. I don't like to read too much about these books in case of spoilers, but honestly, with as many books as there are, by the time we get to them, I'll probably forget anyway. But still, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, I really think the Doctor, Rose, and Jack make a nice team, and we see a bit of that actually in the next episode, Boomtown. and I'm excited. I'm really excited to actually talk about that one. It'll take a bit to get to, but that's a really fun one to discuss, and one I think is a bit more forgotten. But as for The Empty Child the Doctor Dances, I think it's a extraordinarily strong story. I think it's probably one of the best stories of this season.
I mean, I'm going to have to say yes, just because it's a two-parter, then Henry to me makes it even better than Dalek. As good as Dalek is, as good as Father's Day is, and an emotional level. When you have more time and you have good writing, you get better stories. That's just how it works. So, yeah, I'm going to say it's the best story of the season.
Yeah, it has a great horror vibe. Captain Jack is a fantastic addition, in my opinion. We don't learn a ton about his background, but we learn enough to make him quite an interesting character. I do like the whole idea that he's just trying to. He thought he was trying to scam some time agents. I have to imagine if he knew he was going to be scamming one of them, or someone like the Doctor, he probably would have not. Well, actually, given his confidence, maybe he would have tried anyway.
Yeah, that's the best thing about Jack. Maybe he would have.
But trying to steal he calls it a warship, a Chula warship, but it's really just an ambulance. And he later says, well, they use ambulances in war. So here's some big ones Jack does. Trying to take a Chula warship and use it as a way to scam some time agents out of money.
To be fair, also for the memories.
Well, yeah. I think he's a really fun character. There's so much about the story to enjoy. I think Nancy was a really good character. I almost wish she would have been a companion, but she actually got her family back at the end. So I get it. She has her own concerns, but I really liked Nancy. And I thought Florence Horth was a strong actress. So there's a lot of really strong things in it. And I really do think it's probably, and I don't think it's particularly that disputed. I think a lot of people consider it one of the strongest of this season.
Yeah, and I think it's almost beyond the doubt one of the strongest of the season. Whatever elements Steven Moffat might have as a showrunner, they did not come up in this episode. I think it was very solid, very cohesive from start to finish. I don't think there were any big plot holes or anything of that nature, which I'm not saying that's what he became known for, but he did get some grandiose ideas that might have not always landed. I'll phrase it that way. But yeah, no, this story was almost perfect, honestly. I can't think of much that I didn't like at all. I know we don't put these on a rating scale, but this might almost be a ton of time because literally I can't think of a single scene that I thought was pointless or I didn't like.
Oh, that reminds me. Because I mentioned how it's nice to see sort of bisexuality represented in terms of Jack. But we also saw this guy who, I don't know if he was bisexual or gay, but apparently he was having something with the butcher. People thought it was the wife, but no, it was him hanging out with the butcher, which is why he got some nice big slabs of meat. So that was sort of fun too.
Yeah, and Nancy, you think she's just some cult-skilled
ragamuffin.
Well, you could say that. But no, she price turns up pretty well for herself. Literally blackmails this guy for more food. It was a hilarious scene. Like, it doesn't go out of the way you expect it to go. But honestly, this story is just great. I'm not going to say it's one of Steven Moffat's best stories, but it is a very good story and very likely my favorite story of the entire first season. And plus, anything with Captain Jack, I think, automatically goes up a point. Usually, I guess, I'll phrase it that way. Just because his character is so much fun when written well.
But yeah, naturally, let us know what you thought about this one. If you disagree and you think it's like an overrated episode or whatever, just let us know either on Twitter or down below here on YouTube. And speaking of which, we do have a Twitter at Brothers Mahoney. You can follow us for a good old time. But what, James, do we have up next?
Coming up next, we are going back to the classic series, and we're talking way classic. We're going to Planet of Giants, the 3-episode story from 1964, I believe. Starring, of course, William Hartnell as the first Doctor, along with the always great Susan, Barbara, and Ian. And I think we've only discussed one first Doctor story before, being the An Unearthly Child.
Yeah, that sounds right. So it'll be interesting to see another one. And Planet of Giants is one of the stories, one of the mini stories which you've only seen once. So I think it should be a fun one to revisit, plus it's only 3 episodes, so that's going to make it a little less daunting than some of the other classic Who we've seen recently.
Yeah, and it's also, I remember it being just strange. It's not the usual Doctor Who story that you would be accustomed to. I suppose back then they would be accustomed to a lot of different things. They already had, 2, 3 historicals. They had the Reign of Terror. They had
rather how the Sunshine was.
Well, that was a futuristic one, but they also had the Aztecs. So they would have had 2 very classic historicals. They would have had the keys.
Because Reign of Terror, Marco Polo on the
Oh yeah,
outside.
I'm sorry. I knew there was one more. Marco Polo. Then they would have had the soundtracks. They would have had the Keys of Marinus for big science fiction stories, and of course the Daleks, which you've not discussed yet. So yeah, they actually had a very good mixture of things. But now they just have a 3-episode thing that takes place in modern day London, where it barely even feels like modern day London.
Yeah, it has such a strange vibe to it. But yeah, we will talk about that coming up next. Yeah, as always, this has been Michael.
And I'm James.
This has been the Brothers Mahoney. We thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.